Welcome to I Know a Guy Bicycles, hanging out with the guy. Hey, I'm Justin the Guy. We are doing, what are we doing today? Workshop, AMA. Early Saturday morning for me. It's one of those things where, kind of get a slow roll, especially on the live. So there's going to be a lot of these little mishaps and so forth. But hey, I'm here to take scary out of used, one bike or part at a time. So let's dive into this. Today we're talking about rear derailleurs. Ooh, yeah, rear derailleurs is probably the third most important part of the bike. Number one would be the frame and fork, obviously, because that's what you sit on. Second would be your wheels. And probably the third thing would be the rear derailleur, because when you're on that bike, rolling down the street, mountain, or wherever terrain you're riding on, you're going to be doing that shifter, unless it's a single speed. But other than that, you'll be relying on that rear derailleur to move that chain up and down those gears, get you up and down. All those hills, and we know we have hills. I'm in Colorado, Loveland, and we have the Front Range right next to us, if you're not familiar, and we have the Rocky Mountains behind that. So I'm basically 15 minutes to a mountain bike trailhead or hiking trailhead where I live, in addition to a lot of the bike paths here have rolling hills. So the derailleur, yes, is very important. So what's this workshop going to actually focus on? Well, basically I'm focusing on particular parts that relate to, obviously, bikes, mainly road bikes, because that's my niche. And with that particular conversation, we can talk about these things in real time. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw it in the chat, and I'll address them as they come along to my best ability. In addition to, help out, bring out insights, and if it's a different question related to a different type of derailleur, no worries, or different part that is, go for it. So basically I want to go over the basics in the sense like, okay, I got a derailleur on my bike, or I got a frame. So you got a perspective there too. I'm trying to address those who are trying to like, I saw this beautiful titanium frame on eBay and I want to go buy it, but I'm afraid to try to mix match all the parts and try to make it work. Well, there's a lot of information out there to help you with that, but I'm just trying to take these individual parts at a time to give you clarity in a long-winded way in a live format to help direct those, help you with the direction that you need to figure out those. My niche is basically within the 90s, 2000s, and early teen bikes, the newer stuff that's come out. There's already a lot of information out there for those particular parts. So like the new derailleur that clamps on both sides, that's going to have a whole bunch of documentation already on that. I'm talking about the older stuff where, the internet was starting to warm up and a lot of that documentation got thrown out in the trash years ago and never got uploaded to the internet. So here we are. Anywho, I do come across a lot of these little things and so forth. So yeah. Taking scary out of use. Like my new t-shirt? Yeah. There's a story behind that, and I'll recap that at the end. Why do I have a pink t-shirt on? But anywho, here we go. Well, first I'm going to kind of go through some derailleurs I do have, but I want to throw on some gloves real quick because I don't want to get too dirty, and relation to what those derailleurs need to be and what you're looking for. So the rear derailleur, when you're looking at the 90s, they started with the 7 and 8 speeds, and then you got into 9 speed. And the older derailleurs, like the 7 and 8 speeds, would be interchangeable. So there's a lot of crossover tech in those periods. Today's standards, though, if you have a 10-speed drivetrain, you need a 10-speed rear derailleur, 11-speed as well. Sometimes you can get the other ones to work, but it's best to try to home into the same model year. So it doesn't have to be the same model per se. When I talk about models, there's like, in Shimano, there's Dura-Ace, Ultegra, 105, Tiagra, and Sora, which is your top 5 componentry and road. They also have that on mountain bike. Like the top 3 is XTR, XT, LX, which they may have changed some of those by now, and Dior was like the top 4 of those. So you got at those levels. So if, like, for example, you got a piece that's in you got that piece where it's like a 2001 and it has Ultegra 6500 on it. Well, you can probably do a 105 6500 or 5500 model. So you can kind of, go up and down the scale, but try to keep it within the same vintage, if you will. Shout out. Shitty. Thanks for pinging. Yeah, I am one of many guys and gals out there that know stuff. And as a guy, I know other guys and gals out there that know stuff too. So I direct people different directions. So, hey, thanks for commenting on the name. And yeah, my wife actually came up with, I know a guy, because that's what she would do like at work all the time, because she was married or dating the guy at the time. So back to derailleurs. I'm going to point out two things right off the bat. You got a short cage and a long cage, and a lot of the newer ones may not have those cage differentiators. But in the older stuff, the reason why you had a short cage and a long cage is the short cage would relate to the chain rings up front. Weird, huh? It's in the back, but it's relating to the front. The short cages go for the double crankset chain rings, and the long cage is typically for the triple, which you'd also would see the long cages mostly on mountain bikes as well, because that wide range of gears. That's two things right off the bat. And I also have a SRAM versions of both as examples here, short cage, long cage. This is actually a mountain or a hybrid derailleur. This is their version of road. SRAMs came up quite a ways, so you'll hear a lot of SRAM in the newer stuff. They've actually done some really comparison. They're actually bucking up against Shimano to do a comparison. You'll see in this componentry brands within like Tour de France and all the major races and so forth, which is great because competition actually drives better products and better pricing, right? So as a consumer, you want that competition. Shimano has been one of the bedrocks of componentry for decades, and they don't like to have competition. But anywho, it is what it is, and it's great. And some of the SRAMs, obviously, like all companies, have their successes and failures or misses, but they're both like really jockeying for the electronic shifting, both for mountain and road. So those are some cool things coming down the pipeline. But on the older stuff, it's just the thing to keep in mind when you're looking at componentry, and this always came back in the 90s where there was Suntour was the other competitor in the 90s, which they only make front suspension now that you'll see mostly. Suntour was not all that great. It was one of those very, very inexpensive componentry that would go on bikes, and you'd have a model that have Suntour. So if you're looking for an older bike in the 90s or the early 2000s, mostly the 90s, and it has Suntour on it, I would just, unless it's like some frame that you want, I would just go away from it. But anywho, but back into what my point is, brand to brand to brand, there's really no crossover, mostly. And when I say that for crossover, for like the derailleurs and the shifters and those mechanical pieces are not a crossover. Although the chains are. Shimano came out with, or SRAM came out with chains, and they had the power link, and that actually worked with all the Shimano componentry, which was great stuff because you had the choices between two chains. And a lot of the quick links and power links today are awesome because you only need this little tool to take it on and off, and it's pretty easy comparatively used doing the Shimano's pin drive system thing, which was always a pain in the butt and always getting the right pin for the right speed of chain. That's a little bit better way to go. So that's probably the only thing that crosses over to brand, but everything else, don't try to do it. I've had customers in the past who try to get a Suntour derailleur to work on a Shimano shifter, and it's just, you just like, why? Because they pick these things up at VeloSwap super cheap, and they think, oh, this is way cool, I've heard good reviews on it. Like, well, you got to have the rest of the stuff to match. Anywho, all right, John, we got a question. Based on, okay, yeah, I'm going to get into the cassettes too. So the question was, I was talking about the cage length is based on the front chain rings. That's the first part. On the older roads, like the Ultegra from I would say 97 to 2005, even a little bit later, they had a long cage and a short cage, and that's usually the quick identifier for what length of cage that you needed for a road bike, if it's the double or front and the rear, or the front, I'm sorry. The rear, then you got a whole nother mess of questions about this little guy. This is the cassette. That's what the chain rolls on, right? So, okay, rear derailleurs will have a range of what cassette range they can take, right? So all these new 1x or 2x with a big cassette range on there, like, this is like your typical Road 27, like a 1227. That will fit most of these, but some cats out there want to get a bigger climbing gear, right? Like a 32 or something like that. Okay, there is a product out there that can help you with that. It's not perfect, but it actually works fairly well. And if you have like a wider range cassette, and I'm working on a bike right now, it's a cyclocross bike. They threw a short cage on there. You had a problem. Rear derailleur's shot. I'm going to go with the long cage, and that should help with that. It's a double, so with a double with the long cage, you can accommodate those taller gears, like to 30, 32, 34. When you get to the monster ones, you'll just need a whole different system, but a little bit lower, so that gives you a wider range. So for those climbing gears and so forth, this little adapter, it's from what was it, Wolf Tool or Wolf? Where is it? They're Wolf something, and this one's the road linkage. Okay, what this is, get a little picture on a close up on that. This goes on the derailleur hanger. This drops down. What this does is takes that derailleur, and instead of being up here, it drops it down lower, which gives you that it gives the derailleur more of an open range. Because what happens when that derailleur is too tight, compact position here, and you go to that bigger cog in the back, it'll roll up on that, like this jockey pulley will roll on the cog itself, and it'll like that thing, and you can't adjust it far enough down for tension. So what this little guy does, drops that derailleur down to accommodate that. These are not too terrible expensive, like 20 bucks, 30 bucks, something like that. So if you wanted to go with a wider range, that's a good little fix, and that helps that derailleur work up and down. Okay, so when you're talking about those cassettes and wanting to switch out during range, okay, for the old school Tegras or 105s in the early 2000s, you're looking, you could have a straight block from like 11 to 20 or 21 or something like that. That's like very, very micro adjustments when you go up and down the shifting of these cogs, right? So every time that derailleur goes over and goes up and down, it has a minor, and this 27 gives you a little bit wider range. Okay, this is the thing, and this is where my beef is with the newer stuff, like the 1x or the wide range. Yeah, you get to the 10 to 11 speed or even to 12 speeds, but you have such a wide range, each gear has a big jump. It's like a chunk, cha-chunk. Well, not the shifting is not the bothering me, because you're going to have that sound, but it's the actual feel of the ride. It's really going to be harder to find that fine-tune gear for pedaling. So keep that in mind. It's nice to have a little bit of climbing gear, but if you go too much of a range, you're going to be compromising. Just keep that in mind, compromising that smoothness and finding that perfect gear for that tension and climb that you're doing. So that's where the more compact roads, and that's where the doubles and the triples, and they've got rid of the triples. With the doubles, you still have that lower gear, so you have that range again, which I've found to be super smooth, especially here in Colorado when you have hills. The 1x, it all depends on your area where you're riding to. So if you're really like somewhere flat, like Nebraska, no offense to Nebraska people, but it's flat, and you go on bike paths and so forth. Yeah, I mean, 1x is probably just all you need. And quite honestly, some of the riding I do here, probably a 1x would be fine too for around the city. So that's something to think about. So cassettes is a whole other story, but it does relate to the derailleur and how it does that range. So keep in mind, when you look up the specs on some of these derailleurs, especially the new ones, they'll tell you the top out range, like only will go to a 28 or a 30. And that's pretty much true, because when you throw this on there and you have a bigger gear, it's going to ramp up on there. But there's this little adapter here which, you know, you can play with and to drop that derailleur down and bring it down to accommodate that wider range. It may not be as smooth for shifting up and down, but it'll get you there. That's what it comes down to. So more about derailleurs. Hopefully I answered the cassette relation of the derailleur size. When you're looking at mountain bikes, same kind of thing. There'll be a longer cage to accommodate for the wide range. That was always been going on since the 90s. And you'll see the newer ones, which are just like these monster derailleurs for that wide, huge range, and that's what they're designed for. And they have like a lock system which prevents the chain slap and so forth. But specifically for road and the vintage of 90s and 2000s and early teens, yeah, the cage length is going to be something in there. Another part I want to talk about is the jockey pulleys. So the jockey pulleys is something that's a wear point on a derailleur, which is these guys. And I have a nice little bin of busted up ones. And when I say busted up, it's, you know, you can't really tell. They're totally destroyed, but I come across a lot and they'll have a crack. Basically, they kind of dried out. It's a plastic or a nylon, and they'll, I mean, this one, the teeth look great, but it has a big old crack, which causes that space, and that is no bueno. It's not going to be good. That also happens on cerams. Here's another one that's like a missing tooth. So jockey pulleys are not terribly expensive. So that's one of those things where you can go and spend 15, 20 bucks just the replacement ones, and they're pretty easy to install if they are cracked or worn down. So if you're buying a used bike or a used part and the teeth look worn or it's not as smooth as you like, that's something you can go. And your more expensive ones, this is the alloy one with a sealed bearing in there. So those are the hot topic, and there's some other ones that are a bigger span to put on there, like a little bit wider. Also, I can't stress this most importantly, these just don't switch over to any speed. So you want to make sure, number one, it's the right brand. So Shimano SRAM, they're going to be different. And because you can tell, this is a SRAM one and this is a Shimano one. So they're going to be different teeth and different pitches, and also the speeds is going to be the other thing. So if it's an 8-speed, 9-speed, 11 or 12-speed, you want to get the right speed jockey pulley. Some may interchange, but I would talk to your mechanic that's selling it to you, or those little chat bots off those websites that you're buying from, like Jensen's USA or Planet Cyclery, is the two I buy a lot from because the prices are actually pretty decent for what I do. You'd think I'd have a wholesale license, which I can try to hound those wholesalers again, but the thing is, I'm a guy in a garage and they don't like selling to guys in garages. I can try to fudge it and say I'm a mobile guy, but I'm really not that mobile. I'm a little older. I like to stay put in one place. Plus, I know where all my tools are, and I don't want them falling on the back of a truck rolling around. Anywho, so that's where I've really kind of leveraged sell prices of like the chains and cassettes, and even a lot of it on eBay too. For example, eBay, I found a front derailleur and some brakes on a bike that I'm fixing up, which is this Project One, this flame one behind me. And I wanted the brakes to match, and also I wanted to get the front derailleur. Well, the front derailleur I had was a band clamp, and this is a braze-on. So like we talked about last week, the front derailleurs, I came across that issue and went, oh crap. So I got to order one of those. Front derailleur's not too expensive, but I found it like $5 to $10 cheaper there than the actual websites that I found that sell directly, that kind of thing. So back to jockey pulleys. That's what we got going on here. Is you want to make sure you get the right ones, and they're not too terrible to take apart. I do have a video that came out yesterday, or not yesterday, last week, that took one of these completely apart and how to take the jockey pulleys off. It's pretty easy with the Allen wrench on that, and I can go over that too in a second here. Excuse me, I got to close my garage door because apparently my neighbor decided to use the weed whipper. Hopefully you're not hearing it, but it is definitely distracting to me, so, and they're a little early working on their yards. Well, anyway, back to derailleurs. So we're going over jockey pulleys. We can do this real quick too, just to do a showing. So jockey pulleys, you'll have, there is two. There's the upper and the lower, right? The upper is on the top part here, and I think it's a 3. And I like to use the Allen wrenches that have a flatness to them, not the ball style. What I'm talking about there is the ball style doesn't connect flushly. I mean, you can use them, but you'll feel there's more of a wiggle. And you don't want, the smaller the bolt, the better the contact you want on all 6 of those sides, because if you get in there and there's something kind of not matching correctly, you can strip that out. And believe me, stripping out small bolts is the worst thing, because you got to use go to a hardware store and buy a small little easy out, and you got to drill the thing in there, and it's like another hour and another $20 worth of problems. So get yourself some good Allens. If your Allens are starting to wear out and they're not contacting, go buy a new set. They're not that expensive, and you'll save yourself time and money by not having to do this drilling easy out process of any bolts if you have good contact with good Allens. And I've gone through smaller ones, of course, get more compromised faster. And there is a plethora of different types of Allens out there. I think Silka has one where they have this, we have like this super close connection and so forth. And yeah, you can buy another $100 Allen set, or you can get the Parks one, which is pretty good too. So you can just, this is the number 3, I'm sure that was, 3 millimeter. And that takes that bolt out like so, and you just slide that guy right out, and then your jockey pulley is free. And then you can put it back in. And keep in mind, the jockey pulleys, one is usually directional and be a little arrow on there. It has to go the direction where the train is going, not backpedaling, but going forward. And the upper and lower have a different purpose. The upper one has a float to it, goes up and down. The back one, the lower is more stationary, and also it'll have that, it's kind of worn off, but you see that little arrow. That's the direction it's supposed to go. So the video that I had last week, when I tore it apart, it's like, oh, somebody put the bottom lower on backwards, and I was like, oh, okay. And there was a different color. If they're the same color, that's a quick identifier that, okay, these match. You can get a black one, that's fine. It doesn't have to be matchy there. If you find the replacement, the only good replacement is in black versus gray. That's okay, okay. So when you take these guys apart, and you have that jockey pulley, and here's a cracked lower with that arrow. That gives you a little better object there. And some of these will have a nice little sealed bearing to them, and some are just, the cheaper ones are just a bushing. So you see there, this one has a little bearing in there, and this guy slides out, and there's a metal sleeve inside there. You can clean these guys out, get all the contaminants out of there. When you put it back together, you can I like to use a little bit of light lube, even though they say you don't really need to. It's just, also the guy that will squeak on you if it gets really dry. You ever heard, you go down the bike path and you hear that little mouse squeak? It's this guy. Most of the time. Sometimes this is a chain. Sometimes the chain itself is like really dry, but the jockey pulley will make a little squeak, and you put just a little bit of drop of a light lube. It doesn't have to be heavy, and that will make that mouse go away. So just amazing how fast those will go away when you just put those little drop of lube on there. And the fancier ones, like I mentioned before, will have these sealed bearings, and if those feel like rocky in there, then you may want to replace those, that kind of thing. So you got the smoothest of the jockey pulley. Got a question here. Are you known as, I know a guy by bicycles or by another name? Well, my company is I Know a Guy Bicycles. Basically a garage shop. I refurbish road bikes and sell them. My name is Justin. Another name, yeah, I really, business-wise, I really don't go by any other names, but I Know a Guy or Know a Guy Bicycles. You know, mainly I don't know a guy bicycles. So, but yeah, good question. So when you're looking internet stuff out there, it's mainly just I Know a Guy Bicycles. And sometimes there's abbreviations, like on Twitter. I think it's IK, the acronym of I Know a Guy, IKAG. Yeah, you're making me think this morning. How dare you? So back to jockey pulleys. So different brands, different speeds, uppers and lowers. So you got a lot going on there, right? So you want to make sure you get the right ones to throw it on there. Sometimes the jockey pulleys, the fancier ones, the alloy ones. Back in the day, these were fun. When they were accessorizing, blinging out your bike. Oh, I totally was a sucker for this in the 90s. They'd have different color anodized jockey pulleys in addition to crank sets and brake levers and not just bottle cages, but you can really Rastafire your bike out with all sorts of colors. And I think you can still get some of those today. It's kind of like identifying the bling, like Chris King headsets is another thing that's like big bling item. Chris King, if you don't know, Chris King headsets has been around for several decades now. They're known to be like the thing of if you have a Chris King, actually this bike here has a Chris King headset on it and it's red. They had variations of different colors, and you can do red, white, and blue, Rasta colors and all that. I don't know if they still, with the integrated headsets, I think that's kind of fallen to the wayside, but they also were known for like stellar hubs when we did a lot of those custom wheel builds back then too. So I'll have to look up their website currently and see what they're shooting out, but they still are around. They are really known as like the top end Dura-Ace equivalent, if not better. But back to like blinging out your bike, you can get some jockey pulleys there if you really want to. And then there's like the bigger rollers, ones that you'd have to replace the cage portion here, which that video shows you how to do that from last week. But you can take that out and put the new one in there with that big roller. I haven't really played with any bikes with those, but I have known that the jockey pulleys have gotten bigger a little bit from Shimano and SRAM the last few years, so might be something to that. You can probably read up a whole bunch on that as well. But identifying, so you got yourself your old bike, and you're like, okay, I want to upgrade the old Tegra to a Dura-Ace. You know, the rear Shimano numbers are going to be RD, rear derailleur, dash, whatever, and that even goes up to current today's stuff. This is 6500, the 105 is 5500, and oddly enough, I believe the 9-speed Dura-Ace is 7600, so then it goes to 77, 78, but you can just Google those, like RD-7700 Dura-Ace, and you'll find quick information on how many speeds it is and that kind of thing there. All right. You just mentioned your name as Justin. Oh, well, that's my name. That's what my mom gave me. So, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, good job. Hopefully it turned out working on you. It looks like Shady did a repair, Ultegra repair on the zone, and hopefully it worked out well for you. And hopefully, you found some good insights in that kind of thing. But anyway, there's ceramic sealed bearings. You got, and most of them are nylon, unless they're alloy for the derailleur jockey pulleys. Other things, there's these pivots in the springs. There's a four pivot, and some of those companies have played with those quite a bit, and barrel adjusters. So you always want to make sure when you install or working with your derailleur, make sure the barrel adjuster is functional and working. I've had a couple where like this one's missing, it broke off, or one of them broke off. That's right, I have it here actually. A week or so ago, and the barrel adjuster broke off, so it was not able to adjust that cable tension. Okay, that's a very important part. These little guys are designed to have a tension on them and from the shifter, right? So this is the muscle, and the derailleur or the cable is the nerve, and the shifter is the brains. Well, you're the brain controlling the brain of the shifter, right? And that moves the derailleur just one notch at a time, right? A certain spacing. And that spacing, if you compromise, or that spacing is compromised from the shifter to the derailleur, which is the housing or the cable, that throws that shifting off a little bit. So that's where it's always really good, by good standards, to replace your cables and housing if you haven't replaced it before, or if you're having shifting issues. It's one of the lower lifts expense-wise is to make that shifter perform well. Then, if that's not the case, and it's like the derailleur or something else, at least you've cleaned that portion up, so whatever you put on there is in good standing. And so that's where that contact point of the housing in this barrel adjuster, and here's a little gold nugget here. When you unscrew the barrel adjuster out, what that does is lengthens the housing, okay, gives the housing more space, which tightens the cable. So tightening is loosening the cable, screwing out the barrel adjuster tightens the cable. So think of opposite. When you're tightening and loosening, you're doing the opposite effect. So if you need that cable to be tighter and push that cog up, you need to unscrew it. If it jumps too high up and needs to go down, you need to tighten it down a little bit. And when you do micro adjustments, always do micro adjustments on a barrel adjuster, like a quarter turn at a time, and see how that reacts when you're going through those gears. So basically you put your cable through here. There's a bolt here that holds the cable. The SRAM version has like a ramp to it. Campanoli has their own, I'm sure. So keep in mind, so if you got this out of the box, you're like, ooh, okay, go find a video how to throw a cable on that particular model of derailleur you have, because it may be something completely different than you thought. And some of the newer Shimano ones, I had a question about this. I didn't have the derailleur in stock at the time last week for the front derailleur, but it is this guy. This is the R8000. This is the newer version, 11 speed. This is a whole technical mess of a nightmare of the mechanic perspective of setting up. It is cool once you get it figured out. I do give it that. Super cool. But there's a lot of steps in just throwing the cable in there and tighten down a bolt. So if you got yourself one of these guys, very complicated. Watch a video or two, because you'll need it. I mean, even I watch videos to refresh myself, because I don't deal with these on a daily basis. It's the other ones I deal with on a daily basis. But these are pretty straightforward. And when you put the cable and housing in there, you want to be in the most relaxed position, which is on the smallest cog on your gear. So, like this guy here, all the way on the outside. And it will be in that relaxed position anyway when it has no cable in there. And when you put it in there, you want it like hand tight and tighten that bolt down. Then you do micro adjustments with the barrel adjuster on there. Ah, nice. So Shady did 105 pulleys. Yeah, hopefully, yeah. So, once you do it once, you're like, oh, that's not really too. It's like one of those things in any kind of tinkering world. Sometimes you're scared of doing something, and when you dive into it, like, oh, that was way easier than I thought. These jockey pulleys, that's one of those things that works out good. I'll say, okay, where's your question? I replaced Ultegra pulleys with 105 pulley wheels. You know what? They're probably the same pulley. I mean, they have probably an upper end one. A lot of the pulleys, I should go back to the pulleys for a split second to talk about that. Pulleys sometimes will have, like, it will work for 105 Ultegra or Ultegra Dura-Ace pulley or that kind of thing. It's going to be just fine, because the spacing on the 105 derailleur for that vintage speed is going to be the same as the Ultegra. Even in the pinch, you can still do it on the Dura-Ace too. So it's just one of those things that it kind of crosses over. The quality of the pulley may be a little bit different. Granted, I mean, it might be not the bearing one, it might be just a sleeve, and it just rolls out on that sleeve. It might wear out a little bit faster. The performance might be a little bit less. And when I'm talking about performance, it's so micro, you may not even notice. Most likely you won't, because there's going to be other things. There's so many other things going on in that drivetrain. The jockey pulley performance level is going to be on the lesser portion of it. And that's what kind of cracks me up when they came with, like, oh, I had one sales rep about 7-8 years ago come in and they're like $300 pulleys. And I was like, you what? No. This is ridiculous. This is for somebody that has more dollars and cents and is just going to buy this because they saw it in the magazine. We never sold one. It was one of those things, and we had a lot of high-end people coming into the shop that I was working at, and they're like, "Nah, I'm not going to do that." We had a display that was kind of like, "Well, you pay for it when you sell one," kind of thing. And we're like, "Okay, we'll try it out." Service, like, yeah, no. Anywho, I mean, there is some performance factors out there, but you don't have to go to this upper extreme. And again, a lot of those levels will cross over. Same thing with the full derailleur. I mean, you could have thrown, you have an Ultegra drivetrain, and all you could find is a 105 rear derailleur, like the DR 5500 or RD. I'm sorry, DR. Rear derailleur 5500 from Shimano, which is maybe the step down. Differences between those two are so minute. You may not know the difference between them, but you'll notice the aesthetics because the 105s are usually black versus the polished aluminum, that kind of thing. So I'm a matchy-matchy person. That's why I was like, okay, even though this Project One had Dura-Ace brakes, but it was the older Dura-Ace, and I wanted to match the newer Ultegra, which has that kind of like a bluish finish to it. I wanted it to match, so yeah, I paid the extra $60 to have brakes to match, and I'll just sell those Dura-Ace ones to offset the price. The front derailleur I had to, because it was like clamp on versus braze on. It was just not going to work anyway, so I was figuring, well, I'm buying that, might as well just buy the other one. just go for it. So you can see, I have the bins of my extra bits, and that saves me when I get in a situation where I need to repair something quickly. Like I lucked out with that one barrel adjuster. It was on actually a SRAM. Then I popped this one off. And those are different. The barrel adjuster on those. These on the Shimano's just screw out and there's a spring in there for pressure. The SRAM ones have this little clippy deal here. You got to pull that out. This is a cartridge that slides in and out. So there's like a clip, and you got a very, very small screwdriver to pop that out and snap it back into place. Kind of cool, but not as friendly to work on, that kind of thing. So, all right, clamp bolts are pretty straightforward. You want to make sure these do have, when you unscrew these out, these things like to slide around. So you may get confused where they're supposed to, that washer plate, and it's keyed, so it's supposed to be here, but sometimes they'll flip over here and you'll clamp it down on there. Try to get some, look up some good pictures and video to see if you can get that and make sure it's right. If you're taking it off your old bike, take a quick picture of the derailleur first. I've done that before. Like, okay, this cable routing is really weird, so I'm going to take a picture of this so I can reference it when I'm putting it back together. So where's that cable go again? Oh, it goes that way. All right, so I'm not putting it on. Because some of these are kind of intuitive, and some of them are not. It's like, I don't have an example of the not one, but it's really kind of like where, kind of look at that. It's like, quick glance, you're like, where's that go? Well, the cable comes in through here, housing stop, goes up, and this guy goes around the back, up and around and back and out. So it's like, oh. So that can get kind of tricky. So if you have a pre-existing one, if you're buying a new derailleur out of the box or a new used to you, you can look up some videos and see the cable routing. And I've had to do that on some prior past and some especially niche ones, especially like Campanoli type stuff. You're like, I want to make sure I do it right, that kind of deal. So back to the rear derailleur. So they all have a big spring in there that usually cannot be replaced, and these pivots are pinned, so you can't, in the video of last week, you can't take those apart, but you can take these portion springs out, clean them, put the seals back in, and repack them with some grease. This is the one I worked on last time, so it's like super nice and smooth. Does it need a lot of grease in there? Probably not with that seal. The ones I pulled off so far really have nothing in there. You're just looking for contaminants and rust, that kind of thing. And that just, you know, the performance of this portion, the swing down, that accommodates the ramping up and down that cassette in the back. This guy here also too is a pivot that controls that point too as the derailleur goes up and down, that kind of deal. So, all right. So, and there's also, want to talk about the high limit screw and low limit screw. This is something that confuses everybody, including myself. I've been doing it for so long because I always forget what the H and L mean. So the lower is the portion here, which is the lower screw, which adjusts the outside to the cassette. And that is important because if that one's too loose, that lower one's too loose, or in this case, the L is too loose, that derailleur can go too far and throw that chain right into your wheel. So you want that tightened down so it stops right there. And the H, which is for high, is for your harder gear. That controls going into the frame where that derailleur or hanger is. So you can see I'm screwing this and it's kind of slowly moving up. That controls that on the inside. So to adjust those, I would tighten these in a little bit. Once you get the cable adjusted, hitting all the gears, that's the first step. The second is tightening your H screw in tight so it goes up one gear. Then start unscrewing it slowly until it drops down into that small cog in the back. When I'm talking about cogs, I'm talking about the small one here, this guy. All right. And on the L for low, same thing here. Well, you want to go down here, tighten it up, and if you shift and it doesn't go up, you unscrew it a couple turns, try it again, shift, and once it gets in there, and you want to get in that big cog and be smooth, and that's where you stop the thread. If you have a problem with these little screws backing out because they seem loose in there, you can take them out all the way, put a drop of removable Loctite and let it dry, then put it back in there. Or I use quickly a plumber's tape, like that white stuff. You just wrap it around the threads and you tighten it down. That just kind of secures that screw so it doesn't back out while you're riding. Road bikes is not so much, but for mountain biking, you got a lot of vibrating going back there. You want to make sure those screws stay in place. So the derailleur does not want to go anywhere else than where it's been designed and also adjusted to. And this is all your B screw, tension screw here. That's this guy right here. That goes up against the derailleur hanger here, like so. That changes the pitch of the derailleur. So if you have a short stack cassette, like something that doesn't have wide range, you can unscrew that out so that derailleur fits in. But when you're on that big cog in the back, like if you have a wider range with a big cog here, and you're in there, and that jockey pull is rubbing, like you just start to tighten that in, which pushes that derailleur down, like so, and that'll release that pressure. The idea is you don't want to go too far because if you change cassettes and go to a lower ratio, and that's still adjusted to the higher ratio, it's just not going to shift as smooth. So sometimes you play with that B-spring adjustment and you bring that derailleur in, it's like a lot smoother on the lower end, like the smaller cogs of the first half. You want to find that sweet spot with that B-string. And we've had problems with these back in the 90s, like the screw wasn't long enough. We would flip them around the other way so the head of the screw would give us that little extra lift before these little guys were invented. Back to these guys to help bring that derailleur down and accommodate that spacing, that kind of thing. So we cover the jockey pulleys, the barrel adjuster, the limit screw, the B-spring, and the cable tension. So the last thing probably on the derailleur we want to talk about, that's rear, unless anybody else has any question, is what's it hook up to? The derailleur hanger, of course. Silly, right? The derailleur hanger. Okay. The newer version of derailleur hangers were these, and not these derailleurs, but the new ones, they have like this, like the through axle thing, and it fits in there, and it bolts through, and they're content on both sides, and all this cool stuff. I haven't played with one yet, but it sounds kind of crazy. Should be fun. It's mostly on mountain bikes so far, but we'll see what they do on road. But the derailleur, dropout derailleur hanger has not really changed too much in the last 40 years. That being said, there's really just two types to look for in a frame. If your bike already have a bike and you're looking at the derailleur hanger, this is your derailleur hanger. This is what that derailleur threads onto, this little guy here, okay? You notice it's just one piece. Okay, a lot of these in the 90s, 80s, older vintage, even early 2000s, they didn't have a removable one. This is the standard fixed one. So if this booger gets bent, it's pretty much toast. I have another frame where somebody cut this off, two holes, found one, threw it on there. And the derailleur replaceable ones, we'll get that in a second, but there's a lot of different sizes. He found one that kind of fit, slapped it on there. When I bought the bike, I didn't notice it, shame on me. And I basically took the bike frame out of circulation. I'm like, nope, that's not, I can't feel comfortable selling this bike, and this full carbon bike, with this kind of halfway of doing something for a hanger. Probably worked fine for the rider that I had on there, but shame on that rider knowing that they did that to the bike, selling it. They should have been like, nope, not gonna sell it. That's gonna be me forever bike, and make a lamp out of it when I'm done. So this is, back in the day, Trek could basically debond this piece and replace it with a new one. You might be able to find a carbon guy or a Thai or somebody that has these hangers, but most likely, so if this part is quite broken, this is the weak point. This is the Achilles heel of the bike frame. Let's just put it that way. Back in the 90s, when the Schwinn rep had come in, when Schwinn was actually Schwinn and they had a defective frame, they had put this hanger in a vise and just bend it down, snap it off, or just bend it, it's done, toast. That being said, there's a tool called a derailleur hanger alignment tool. This is this guy here. Only get these and play with this when you're very educated. Because again, you don't want to break this little guy, especially if it's a solid one and not a replaceable one. And if you can bend these a little bit. There's micro adjustments on the alloy. On steel frames, there's a lot more play, but be manipulated. So I've had cases where these were bent on a steel frame. Even on mine, pop rod I had, which is a full steel cyclocross frame, hit some mud, my rear derailleur ripped up, bent my hanger, dinged my frame, toasted the derailleur, chain was toast, and messed up my wheel. It was like one of those situations, like all in one scenario. I wasn't going fast or anything, but it just did a number. I was able to bend the steel derailleur hanger back into place by using one of these. These are, you can get inexpensive ones, but I suggest if you're going to use one, get the Park tools. It's, this is the DAG 2.2. They have a newer version of this too. And keep in mind, when I was a service manager back in the day, and we were doing lots of new bikes, of course, I would have my builders double check the derailleur hangers on the new bikes. And the new bikes, it would be off a little bit. Today's standards, a little bit better, better shipping, packing materials and all that really helped that from being dinged or whatever. Either they weren't lined up from the manufacturer, which is probably most likely the case, but that's one of those situations that just a little bit of tweak that changes the angle of the derailleur just a bit and just moves it just one direction, because these are supposed to be at a vertical plane with the cassette, and if it's off by just a little bit by swiveling this way or this way, that will not have your derailleur perform very well at all. And sometimes it's that little tweak, boom, it makes a big, huge difference. Again, aluminum's really soft material, and therefore if you have a non-replaceable dropout, you want to be very, very, very light adjustment on that. Hopefully you don't have to adjust a lot by just a little bit. But the good news, majority of the bikes that you'll probably find out there from like 2000 and on have these replaceable hangers. The replaceable hanger is proprietary to the actual manufacturer frame. So if you need to replace one, you'll have to go to find that dealer. There's also a company called Wheels Manufacturing. And they have what they call a problem solver. And Wheels, they started off with bearings. Like a bike shop people like me, and we're like, we need cones to repack our hubs. And that's how the company, I believe, started. Now they do all sorts of variations. So they have like derailleur hangers from all kinds, but you want to match the brand. This is the Orbea, so you need a Orbea and the year and the model, and you'll be able to match, because these bolts here are going to be different, and the fitting is going to be different on each bike frame from different manufacturer to brand. So like Trek and Specialized, Cannondale, they'll all be different. So what the concept behind is that Achilles heel, like I mentioned before, is now replaceable. So if this gets compromised too much to the point that you can't adjust it or it snaps during the impact, that your frame is not toast, and you just replace it by 2 bolts or 3 bolts, whatever the case may be, to put on a new hanger. That's all great and fine and dandy. That's awesome. I had the felt I'm working on this week as a repair. They snapped the derailleur off. The derailleur went into the rear wheel, ripped it. I think the derailleur might be okay after second looking at it, and at first I thought it was, but his cog set's so big, we need to replace it with the longer cage anyway, so it's a good opportunity to do that. But anywho, he went to the felt dealer and found a derailleur dropout. Okay, so with these dropouts, they're pretty straight. You know where I'm going with this. Double check it with your derailleur hanger alignment tool, because it might be close but may not be exact where it's supposed to be, and just needs to be a nudge just a little bit. With the alloy, be careful with them. And most of them are made out of alloy, and the idea behind that is this alloy is a softer material than the actual dropout itself. So this is hardened aluminum, this is a little bit softer. The idea that this is supposed to fail before this. That's how it's supposed to, concept-wise. And from impact, if your derailleur is impacted, hopefully your derailleur is still okay, and this is broke here, but sometimes you have to replace the derailleur too, to replace that bit that goes, right here, like so. On that. How these extensions work, I should tell you here. This basically goes over on top of that guy and threads in, and that just drops down that derailleur hanger longer so you can accommodate that wider range of gears. Great, awesome option if you're wanting to go, if you got this frame and you want to go do a 1x and you want to do a big old pie plate of a cassette in the back. That's what you would do, is put that on there so you can accommodate that range. So we talked about these guys, and you get them from the manufacturer. A lot of them are softer, but I have come across a Trek version, and I think it was a Marlin. It's a couple years older, that even when I put the derailleur hanger tool on there, just adjust a little bit, it snaps. There's so little material in there, and the alloy is so brittle. It's one of those things that that's the only one I've came across that just like almost snapped when you looked at it. It's like then you have to drive over to the Trek store and like, I need one of these. And they're like, well, happy to do so. And they give you ones like $20. I'm like, sweet. And able to fix it, put it on there, and it was pretty good. I double checked it with the liner tool and it was fine. But and the same thing, the guy is a mountain bike. He bashed it again, and I went to adjust it and popped again, and was like, okay, I'm going back to the stretch store, and I'm going to get you one to fix this, and then I'm going to give you a second one to put in your pack. So if you get out there, you can put a new one on there on the fly if you need to. And he was like, that's great, because that's just the Achilles heel for that thing. Sweet. You got Shady has a Aqua Orbea Di2, 10-speed. Nice stuff. Yeah, unfortunately for what I do, is refurbishing road bikes and try to keep them at a lower price point. So I don't do a lot of high end. I leave that to the pros closet and other shops, because there's a bigger need for people just getting road riding, that kind of thing. So Unfortunately, I don't see a lot of the Di2s. I do some service on them, obviously, but it's not, unfortunately, it's one of those things that, the price points for me to keep it under 1,000, you don't really see those bikes under that. Oh, nice, yeah. Oh, it was off by, oh, okay. Shady said he fixed his derailleur hanger and it was off by 15 millimeter. Whew, that's pretty big gap. It's not the 15 millimeter at the point, I'm hoping. It was probably at the expand rate. This is where this goes. I should show that. As it goes on a derailleur hanger, and this little bar here is your measurement piece. And you measure that to the rim. And that's where that measurement is referring to is 15 millimeters out. So, and you go obvious 360 all the way around, and this thing slides in and out, and it should have little measures so you can put it back. You have to get through the frame to measure that one spot, but you can do at least 75% of the wheel, 3/4 of the wheel by just measuring that, and that's how you kind of get that hanger. And that's the reference point. So make sure your wheel is in the dropouts, and also make sure your wheel is true. Because you got to have a good baseline for this tool to work. Whew, we went down a rabbit hole on that one, didn't we? Yeah, because make sure the wheel's true. Make sure it's in the dropouts, like these guys flush, because you want that circular plane to be as the test point for the actual tool to work. Because that's off, you're going to be moving your derailleur off, and that's just adding bad on. So yeah, it's a little tricky. Is it impossible? No. Is it easy to learn? Yes. Tested on a couple bikes that you're, if you have some floater bikes that you just want to mess with, that you don't ride or whatever, that are inexpensive. Same thing for truing wheels. I've always said, just go to your local bike shop and say, hey, you have a busted up wheel? I'll give you one, or let me know when you have one. Just take that wheel and just play with the spokes, just tensions, and see how it moves back and forth, up and down in a truing wheel. That's a good way to understand the principle of how to true the wheel before you go grab your $800 wheel set and start going at it with a spoke wrench. That's something that can be messy real quick. So yeah, the first wheels I learned to true on were new bikes, but they were the bottom line Schwinn's. I think the one was a probe and the female version was the lure. Let that sink for a second. They actually named them for that. Probe and the lure. Male and female. No wonder Schwinn didn't make it. Right? One of many other things. But yeah, kind of woo. But that's where, I learned those bikes were a hot mess new. And it was some of those things that you did a lot of truing, you did a lot of bolts, a lot of hammering when you're not even supposed to be using a hammer to get those things to work. They were new back in the 80s, late 80s. So things are a lot better now, to a point where you can go buy a bike from Canyon or Specialized, have it shipped to your house with minimal video instruction, get it back together, and go for a ride. It is, always going to be a question on that. There's some videos, a lot of videos that are out there for fitting. There's also a fitting program that uses the software that goes into your camera as an app, that you put your camera on a tripod and you do those things. And I haven't done it yet. I'm thinking about trying it out. So I do static fitting here. And for when I sell a bike as well, when I do a tune-up, I provide a static fitting, because let's face it, most of the people that ride bikes have bought either used or even new haven't probably been fitted properly to a bike, just as a static fitting, because bike shops no longer do that anymore. But anywho, I got off of the rails there, sorry. But back to derailleurs. So to kind of recap, where are we on time here? We're getting a little close. Woo! Good, long-winded. It's a big topic, and it is a big, very, very big part of your riding. I mean, if this little bugger is out of whack, it will bust your ride. Like, it'll make you frustrated, and make sure, preventative maintenance on this guy and adjustments is well worth it, because you don't want to be 10, 20, 30 miles out and this thing fail on you, not to say it's not going to, but it does at sometimes. For example, this week I've had my first chain break ever riding, which is kind of weird that I should have had that experience a lot more, but I maintained my bikes apparently good enough that I never had that issue. And this was a newer chain, and I was out there, you know, had to pull out my MacGyver chain tool. Yeah, the Toe Peak made I don't know if they make them anymore, but it was like a multi-tool. It's called MacGyver, and I had a chain tool in there. And you know, one of the multi-chain tools that goes with everything else, they're not the easiest to work with. They're not like nice and big and easy to, you know, leverage it. It's like this micro thing. It's really basically designed for you to splice your chain back together and get going, get back home. So that's what I had to do. I had to shorten like 4 or 5 links to get the chain on there and stay on my low cogs. And, you know, I made it, and I'm probably gonna do a video inspecting the chain and figure out what the heck happened. The chain is only 4 months old, and I haven't put a lot of miles on. I don't do a ton of miles, unfortunately, because yeah, I got a 7-year-old, I got a life, I got kids, and I do this. And, it's one of those things that when I do go for a ride, I want to make sure it's fine-tuned. And I was climbing up a hill and pop! And it was like, wow, that was crazy. But anyway, that you can't, you know, what I came to is like, okay, do I have my derailleur not adjusted correctly? Was it shifting fine? You know, that was, you know, one of the things I'll be going over. What could have caused it? Could have been a bad plate. I've had from another forum, it's like, yeah, that particular chain had found stress cracks on them in a short period of time. It's like, oh, okay. And it was, you know, I splurged and went for a higher expensive chain. And, you know, when you go with a higher expensive chain, they take away more material. You can see where I'm going with this. So higher expensive chains is like high expensive tires. They perform well for a short period of time. That's just how it works. Chains, they stretch out a little bit faster when they're higher. And I'm sure there's probably research on that, particular chain stretches over a period of time with different brands and different levels. But I just know that it was the less expensive ones, which is ironic. It may be a little bit heavier. And when you're talking about weight difference, it's very minimal. Same thing when you're looking at derailleur weight. It's pretty minimal between like 1 or 2 steps. But when you go like Dura-Ace to this level, there's pretty significant weight difference. They're a little bit thicker alloys or what have you, but that's where I found, and here's another little gold nuggets, when you're looking at replacing derailleurs, if you like the top of the line stuff and you can afford it, that's great. But for majority of riding out there and longevity and derailleurs are gonna hold up, perform well, go with the model below. Reason being, Ultegra is 1 step below and 105 is the 2 steps below. When any manufacturer like SRAM or Campanoli or Shimano, they add their new tech to the top of the line, gets thrown in race circuits, and it's a trickle down thing. Because you won't see it for that first year. They'll put it on the brand new bikes for the flashy new thing for that year, right? And then the following year, the Ultegra will pick up that second level of tech on the Dura-Ace stuff. So they've had a full year to work out any of the bugs they've had when it went to open market, because the race circuit testing is not true testing, because you got a mechanic working on the bike every day. You at home don't have a mechanic working on your bike every day. That's not realistic whatsoever. But so when you're looking at the trickle down tech that goes down to the Ultegra, it's really gotten a lot of those bugs down. So that's when DI2 came out. I was like, ooh, I'm going to wait till it hits these Ultegra, maybe 105, at least a couple of years into it, because they'll work out any of those little kinks before it gets to it. That's why the Ultegra RD 6500 or Ultegra 9-speed Dura-Ace set that they designed in 97, saw them on bikes in 98, 99, lasted to 2005. That's a huge iteration for one group without any major changes, and they're workhorses. So even today, like 20 years later after production, these guys are serviceable and they work great. As long as they're not bent up or anything or damaged by impact, by just general function, they're solid. So therefore, when you're looking at trickle down tech, you know, it's like, yeah, I've even rode Sora for a while on my commuter bike, and I tell you what, this is in the 90s. It worked well. I did not admit it. It's one of those bikes, if it got stolen, I'd be like, whatever. You know, it's like I'm built up like a junker commuter, had Sora on it, and it was solid. And yeah, it was heavy too. But it worked. So when you're looking at, you know, the high-end stuff, it's nice. But is it going to be problematic? Possibly. You put yourself at a higher risk level. The other little story that I have is with Dura-Ace componentry. Dura-Ace only made double chain rings because, you know, Dura-Ace was for racers. None of us normal people with guts ride Dura-Ace. You know, why would we do that? Or want that? So they never had a triple up front for road bikes. Okay, so what you had was just a double, and then you didn't have very much of a range. Well, they finally figured out there's a market for a wider range of gears for those that want a nice high-end carbon bike with a triple Dura-Ace, because there's a group out there, and they finally made one. Well, of course, Dura-Ace triples never made it to the race circuit. What race circuit are they going to put that on? Like, oh, maybe like I don't know, maybe Paris-Roubaix, but, you know, maybe a couple of those hill climbing races. But the racers are like, no triple for me. So they never got tested. So where I'm going with the story, I'm a mechanic in 2001. I'm working at a new shop for me at Cyclery. This is after my parents' shop closed down. And, you know, I had some experience with Dura-Ace and all that, and they just released Dura-Ace for the triple. And people did some pre-season orders, like, oh, it came out, that's it, I'm buying that, I'm throwing $4,000 down in 2001. That was a lot of money back then. Still a lot of money now, but they don't seem to think so as much. But anyway, yeah, back then, that was like top of the line, like $5,000, $6,000, grand on a full carbon OCLV. Prior to Project One, it was like a 5500 with a triple from Trek. Okay, we get these bikes in. It was a husband and wife that got both, you know, like two of these. And these were like friends of the owners, you know. They were paying full retail too. We pull these out of the box and we put them together. And, you know, Dura-Ace stuff, high-end stuff, you get it to your lead mechanics to put together, especially when something's very new. So our lead mechanics get on it. And these are experienced mechanics. Like one's now a pro mechanic for one of the race teams. And he's like, I can't get the front derailleur to work. It doesn't shift. I'm like, really? Weird. Why? I mean, Shimano should know. They've had front triple derailleurs on bikes for at least 7-8 years now, you know? It's like one of those things. It didn't work at all whatsoever. It would like ramp up to the big one, but not go down to the small. It was like, we had 5 mechanics look at it. We're all just scratching our head trying. You were like, okay, it's a $4,000 or $5,000 bike out of the box, new Dura-Ace. It should just be done. And this is before all the videos and stuff are out there or any of that. So we probably got one of the first wave of these things out. Turns out the front derailleur, we had to run the cable backwards on the pinch bolt, not designed to do that, to get the right angle to get the derailleur to throw the whole range up and down. So it was a reverse fix that we figured out in the field, and it still shipped like crap. And now it's like, how do I feel about that? I felt horrible. I mean, I'm like, it shifts. You got a triple Dura-Ace, paid $4 or $5,000. So yeah, there you go. Trickle down technology, especially if it doesn't hit the race market. Definitely get the second year iteration. Also, if you're looking at Dura-Ace, wait till the second year that came out and get that group, because the first year, you know there's going to be something in there. And that's always been the case. I mean, yeah, they do lab tests, they do race tests and so forth. But when it comes down to the general public and actually open market retail, those things don't get tested as much and reliable. That's why the Ultegra RD 6500 derailleur, freaking workhorse. These things last. I mean, this will last another 20 years. I mean, bar being ran into or whatever. So yeah, well, I gotta go mow lawn, apparently, because I hear that outside. So I better go do my house stuff. Thank you for spending time with me on a Saturday morning. If you watch this on the replay, Hope you got some tidbits in there. Feel free to skip around. Check out the information under the description. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in there for links to my website and so forth like that. I know I'm sounding like I'm very pitchy right now. And onto the shirt. Why did I get this shirt? Okay, here's the thing. So, hooray, I got monetized, right? I'm like, ooh, this is the big YouTube milestone. I'm like cranking out videos and trying to build a community and doing all this to help, my business and also help people and all this, community thing. Finally got monetized. And I noticed like other guys out there and gals have like this shelf, which is called a shelf, and there's the products underneath, which you're seeing right now. And I have Spreadshirt, which is recommended to do like custom shirts and so forth like that. And it's like, oh, I'll do that. And it's like, once you get monetized, you can do that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool. But the first image that was pulled over from Spreadshirt was the download, right? Was this shirt and some bigger dude. And I was like, that's funny because I didn't have a choice to select for the upload. And for the first couple of weeks or the first week, it took forever for all the other images. Not all of them uploaded anyway, but this was the shirt. I'm like, I gotta get that because that's just hilarious. Taking scary out of used, one bike at a time. And yes, apparently I can pull off pink. Well, at least I think I can. You be the judge of that. Anywho, have a great weekend. If it's beautiful in your neck of the woods, go out there and get some ride time. If you have some questions about the derailleurs you're working on, feel free to put them in the comments below. I'll try to address those or make a video too. Believe me, I have a laundry list of ideas and there's always something coming. But if there's more common questions that come up more on a certain subject like shifters or whatever, I'll address those a little bit sooner. And again, thank you for spending time with me. Thank you for supporting my channel because yes, I did break that 1,000 and also break that 4,000 hours of insane of watch time. So you guys, apparently I don't bore you to death. So thanks again, and we'll celebrate at some point with something really cool. But hey, right now, from the garage, have a great day.